Good morning, and welcome. Nothing like seeing a very large picture of yourself at 8 o'clock in the morning. My name's Jeff Miller, and I'm the Group President for Ideal Technologies, a division of Ideal Industries. And while Ideal Industries has established itself as a trusted partner to our customers, our employees, and the communities that we serve, and has done so for over 100 years, we've always maintained an eye towards the future and built a track record of innovation across all of our businesses. That innovation and forward thinking has introduced to us most recently innovations such as our Odyssey wireless lighting control solution and our PowerPuck system, which is making its first debut at this year's LightFair. Now, forward thinking appears to come naturally to the distinguished set of panelists that are going to join us this morning, and I think you'll be delighted in the conversation. And that's important because in the world of business building design, architecture, and engineering, we don't need to future-proof our products and our buildings. We need to make sure that they reflect a future purpose. And our guests this morning are going to explore the interaction of intelligent technology with practical innovation and human and social interaction. So, let's get to meet our panelists, shall we?
Design Principal for Perkins+Will, Joe Connell is the recipient of the AIA Chicago Citation of Merit, the DOC Award for the Monsanto Project, the Good Design is Good Business Award for Perkins+Will offices, and the Center for Design Award for SRAM. An active board member for Southern Illinois University's Department of Interior Design, and a frequent contributor to the nation's top design and architecture programs, Joe can also lay claim to projects such as the Bank of Canada building and the IDEO office here in Chicago. Please welcome a 35-year veteran of the industry, Joe Connell. A principal and design director of Gensler Chicago's Health and Wellness Practice Area, Ann Gibson is lauded for her cutting-edge take on developing tailored design strategies for complex problems. Along with projects for Northwestern Memorial Hospital, she was the design principal for the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab in Chicago. And if that wasn't enough, she took home the 2017 Best of the Year Award for Health and Wellness and 2018 Interiors Award for Healthcare. Please say hello to our next panelist, Ann Gibson. With almost 35 years of leading a world-recognized building systems and technologies consulting practice, Karnatz has established ESD's expertise in creating better economic, environmental, and experiential outcomes for their clients. His accomplishments span from the jaw-dropping 3,200-foot-high Jeddah Tower in Saudi Arabia to the critically acclaimed Shirley Ryan Ability Lab here in Chicago. Please welcome to our panel the president of ESD, Karnatz. Serving as the firm-wide director of electrical engineering and a member of the HOK Engineering Leadership Board, Saad Dimachkieh brings 38 years of experience to the field and is in charge of overseeing projects from conception to implementation. His most notable projects include facilities at the NASA Johnson Space Center, the Salt Lake City International Airport terminal redevelopment, BP America's High Performance Computing Center, and the UC Davis Veterinary Medicine Research Facility. Please welcome to our panel, Senior Vice President of HOK, Saad Dimachkieh. And finally, our moderator. Zoe Ryan is a curator and author with a focus on exploring the impact of architecture and design on society. Ryan has overseen notable exhibitions and publications such as Past Forward, Architecture and Design at the Art Institute, As Seen, exhibitions that made architecture and design history, and Making Place, the architecture of David Adjaye, the John H. Bryan Chair, and Curator of Architecture and Design at the Art Institute of Chicago. Please welcome Zoe Ryan.
Hello, and thank you all for coming this morning. It's wonderful to see such a huge breakfast crowd. We are thrilled to be having this panel today, and we're very excited to have a rich and robust conversation. We have, as you saw, a stellar lineup of panelists, all coming from very diverse backgrounds, so we think we're going to have a very lively and insightful conversation today. It's no secret to all of you esteemed guests that many of the trends in architecture and design today are centered around technological innovation. This includes certain things such as the potential of the Internet of Things, the possibilities of big data, the outcomes of artificial intelligence, and the advantages of things like building automation, just to name a few, but things that we will touch on today. These are forever changing how we experience, how we live, and how we work in buildings, and I would also add objects in our daily lives. And today we'd like to discuss how these advancements are and will impact buildings themselves, but most importantly for today's discussion, I think we're very interested in how will they impact the end user, ourselves, the people that experience those projects. I'm very interested in finding out, and I hope you all are too, more about how we can all have a role to play in designing and creating more human-focused or human-centered architecture supported by technological innovation. To kick off the panel, I'd like to start with technology's current role in this space. And as I said, we are very fortunate to have people coming from really diverse backgrounds and in their real experts in their retrospective fields. And I know they all have very different opinions about certain things related to things in the industry that we'll talk about today, which is going to be interesting to hear their responses. And I think the first question specifically could be one of our most interesting in terms of its importance in thinking about technology and its impact on our lives. And I thought to give us also a bit of background on the speakers, maybe they can talk more about your own experiences in terms of how do you think the rapid growth of technological advancements is improving or perhaps posing challenges for building design. And I know that Saad has quite strong opinions about this, so I wondered whether, Saad, you could maybe kick off the panel this morning.
Sure. Thank you very much for having us here. The answer to your question is really both. It did improve our process. If I go back in history a little bit, and some of the audience here, you probably remember 30 or 35 years ago, how we used to do design drawings. We sit on the board and draw by hand. And if we need to coordinate, we go walk over, look over somebody's drawing, print drawings, talk about a lot of things. How do we do things today? It's amazing. We talk about modeling. Everything is modeling. So definitely there is advantage with the technology we have today. It made it easier for us to do certain things. For example, if I look at designing a structural system, and I need to optimize the sizes of my beams, my structure, my panel, my slabs, my columns. It used to be that you have to run program if you do it, and it takes days. Now we can do hundreds of iterations of different options in a very short period of time to optimize these sizes. If you look at the MEP systems, energy modeling, I mean, we used to use it to validate our assumptions after the fact, after we design something, sometimes we don't even do it. That's years ago. Today, we do it to help us, to help our designers, our architects, how to orient the building, how to mass the building, what do you do with wall-to-window ratio, how do you size MEP systems? So technology definitely helped us. Now, on the other hand, we are in risk of losing the human touch. How many times we hear people say, well, did you coordinate? Well, I ran my clash detection program, and it told me that we have thousands of these. And you're going to say, but did you look at it? I have a conduit hitting a box. Well, it's supposed to hit it. That's not a clash detection. That's supposed to be there. A pipe penetrating a slab. Well, it's supposed to be there. It's not. So we're risking sometimes that we're going away from the interactions between designers. And when I say designers, we all design. I'm a designer, Anne is a designer, Kurt is a designer. Everyone is a designer, engineers and architects. So it's not a simple answer, yes or no. It's really both. Mm-hmm. Kurt, what do you think?
So I would echo most everything that you say. One of the things in terms of looking at buildings in the very early conceptual stage, one of the things that technology has really been able to bring us is the use of evidence-based design. And so understanding through evidence of other buildings or other situations that we've already gone through and capturing that data and importing that into our model engines allows us to use these buzzwords that we're talking about, machine learning and artificial intelligence, to really make better decisions around how to site a building and what the strategies might include to most effectively and optimize the systems that are included, beginning with very passive strategies and using, again, evidence from other projects in the algorithm to help better the design and make better decisions. 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, energy modeling probably had an accuracy rate of about 6 to 8% in a really good case. What we're finding now is we're able to model buildings down to 1% accuracy, build them, and then actually perform it in that case. So the ability for us to really dial in and design systems around the purpose and the need and the loads and minimizing the loads and impact on the building has never been greater in terms of our opportunity now. In terms of what Saad said, the human element, I think one of the biggest challenges, my firm, we design building infrastructure systems, building technology systems, and consult around that. So it's the MEP, the technology, and systems like that. And what I am most concerned about technology in terms of the impact of taking away that human touch is what we're calling algorithmic design or machine learning. And so what teams of 5, 10, 12, 15 engineers working together that might take 3 to 6 months on the boards as it used to be or with Revit in a BIM environment can now be done algorithmically in a matter of hours. And so when we think about what that means to the impact of the people, the engineers and the technical and design people who are involved in creating design, there's going to be a massive shift in terms of what capabilities people have and the ability to bring those capabilities to the design process and bring and keep that human element in the design. We see that as a tremendous challenge, and we're looking at how do we train our staff, change who we're hiring, how we're hiring, and the type of capabilities, but still at the end of the day, there's this need for aesthetic integration, symbiosis in the built environment that really, I can't see as far as I can see out right now, not be heavily derived from human interaction and human influence in design. Mm-hmm. So what do you think?
Right, well, all of that is true, yes. It is interesting to say, to look, from my perspective as a designer, just in terms of the tools that we have access to now and how people are using these tools from a design perspective, whether it's Revit or Grasshopper or Lion or Tiger or whatever it is that we have available to us now. We can produce these visualizations and produce these really great, imagery that our clients can understand much better, and that is so exciting. And whether it's, virtual reality or augmented reality, these tools I think are incredibly powerful for us as devices to really communicate our ideas, because really that's what we do, is we share ideas. But going back to what both of you have said, that it's that human interaction that we have to continue to really reinforce and create spaces where people can come together and share ideas. I used to get so frustrated with some of my design staff that would design everything in Revit, and I thought, this isn't a design tool. Like, we need to be thinking about emotion and senses and all of these other elements that kind of embody a really, really powerful experience. And it's hard to get that with technology. It's hard to today think that AI is going to really be able to have the level of emotional sensitivity that we have as designers to really create compelling solutions. So I think it's fascinating to see where it is, and how it can really help in our iterative design process. I'm excited to see, and learn more about, Kurt, what you've been up to, and sort of measuring the effects of the spaces that we create from a kind of emotional and experiential perspective. So I think we're at a great point right now where technology can measure a lot of quantitative information and sort of prove out some of our anthropological and sociological theories that we have as we approach problems. But I think there's a lot on the horizon that's going to take that to another level experientially.
I'm a bit cautious we can have technologically advanced bad buildings, and do. That's what we're up here to try to avoid, right? There's a great book written by Stuart Brand in 1994 called How Buildings Learn. It was a historical view of how buildings adapt and how spaces adapt and how infrastructure is expensive and even building forms and shapes and materials can adapt over time and serve society and multiple users and multiple uses over time. That's one of the promises I see of technology, is actually being able to model future uses. So I think in that respect, I'm very hopeful. But I am worried about the preoccupation of the technology and not the user outcomes. So I think buildings can, and the commissioners, our clients, can lose sight of the humanistic side of not only the people, but actually it's people that make up the teams make up the organization. Their success as an organization or as an entity relies on people being their best and bringing their best. So which is part of the great, right now, really more than a trend, but wave of well-being in the workplace, well-being in hotels, well-being as a lifestyle, not just as a healthcare slogan. So I'm optimistic, but I think we have to be cautious of automating bad things can still have poor results. So the notion that Ann was talking about, how important it is to have the humanities built into the process, and that human experience is what should start the process. When Stuart Brand, one of the headlines of his book was that buildings are predictions, and predictions are wrong. So one thing that's useful about technology is we can maybe get better in visualization and having a higher quality predictive results of that behavior. So and these spaces and these buildings exist for the behavior within them. If we understand the behavior, then we'll have a better building, and hopefully the technology can aid us to get there.
Mm-hmm. So you may be thinking, why would a curator working at a museum be moderating this panel? Surely my knowledge is far less than these guys on the panels. And on one hand, you'd be absolutely correct. But what's been fascinating about being a curator working in historical architecture and in contemporary architecture is that you have to be so fast on your feet these days, because these are the types of questions and the issues that obviously when I'm doing studio visits or thinking about what's the type of work we should collect at the museum or present at the museum, that we're now starting to address. And it's as much these kinds of questions as it is sort of formal questions and aesthetic questions. And I'm absolutely fascinated with issues of progress. And of course, part of my job is to try and place into context, historical context, some of the new innovations that are taking place. So I'm very conscious of lots of what we're talking about being just questions of efficiency, or that progress is always, a good thing. And at times, of course, my job is to ask those questions and say, is it always a good thing? One of the things also that's fascinating about all of these ideas, especially given my role at the Art Institute, is something that the next question sort of grapples with, and that's big data. Because of course, in my job as a curator, this is something that comes up all the time, but obviously also as my job as a curator within the Art Institute, this comes up in terms of our museum campus. At the museum, we use data analysis for all kinds of things now. So we use it to quantify and try and study audience engagement, but also to address things like sustainability. So how sustainable can our campus be regards to the many different types of spaces we have? And of course, the front of house activities are needing completely different types of spaces than our back of house, which is quite specialized. So in this regard, I kind of want to move us on with something maybe that's more specific to technological trends that involve big data, because research has shown that more data was created last year in 2017 than in the past 5,000 years combined. But it's quite difficult to sort of understand, well, what's happening with all that data and what are we doing with that? Because data generated from building systems is certainly contributing to that. And I'm wondering in what are some of the ways that you're seeing analytics that are drawn from buildings data capture having, let's just say, a positive impact on the user, not sort of I'm sure there's many challenges to that, but it's definitely, I'm sure, something that's also driving the type of work you're doing, not only justifying the work you're doing, but also giving you pause to think the near term, but also the far term. And Joe, I know that this is central to the work that I'm sure you're doing at Perkins+Will, and something that very much drives architecture practice today. So I wondered if you could maybe start the conversation.
Certainly. We think of projects or engagements maybe at 3 different buckets or scales. One is at the city and infrastructure scale, the community scale, and that's where data can be very rich and help inform about decision making and long-term investment. Another is the building itself, or the campus, or the built environment itself as an artifact, as an object. And data can help make that design to run more efficiently, to be effective, to be sound. And then the next is the user experience. And I think data can hit each of these spheres very well, actually, and predictive of everything. What's the future of parking lots when we have driverless cars? Do we need them anymore? What about the codes? And right now, in driverless, there's a good friend of mine that I do a lot of bicycling with is a mapping engineer, and he's prototyping right now that there's chips in warning cones in construction zones, so the cars can read the zoning codes and adapt the maps to the greater cloud system. So that is so much data that's happening right now, but the same is true of the badges that we wear when we're walking around a convention center or a grocery store. So what do we do? That's user data that starts to inform perhaps what's needed in the building, and then all the movement in the connective tissues, the infrastructure, which is the data side. So we have projects at cities, we call cities and sites, in the building and the architecture, but it's all about the user experience, right? So measuring the human outcomes is an important part of this. Do people, do they heal faster? Do they have better outcomes in learning environments? Are they more effective at work? Is there less absenteeism? What's the rate of return on innovation investments? These are things that are measurable and knowable, but we have to put in some surprising locations to collect this data and figure out how to get to that data. The Architecture and Design Committee is not good at creating data specialists as part of our team. That is a new phenomenon for us. But there are some programs that are starting to deliver some folks like that for us that we're finding to do some really interesting things. One young team member just did a study for the city of Chicago to look at what would happen to our stormwater and to our crop potential if, through using GIS data, if we used 80% of all flat roofs was growing a crop. What would happen to this? What happens to the storm system? What happens to the water system? What happens to the heat island effect? So that was publicly available information. It was well presented at Mayor's Council. Some fascinating information about how to invest in infrastructure from little bits of data about like how much flat roof you might have in your garage in your neighborhood. So having that data to make big decisions, I think, is one of the most interesting parts of this subject right now.
Mm-hmm. Saad, maybe I can turn to you, because I'm also interested in, obviously there's a lot of impact in some of this data, but some of this data is quite sensitive, depending on where it's coming from and how you use that wisely. In terms of we were specifically talking about things to do with real issues that people might have, health issues, or so I'm wondering, how do you collect data in your firm, and also how does that then get shared in terms of for positive use?
That's interesting. You're right. There is a lot of data available. Sometimes there is an overload of data, and sometimes you can use the data in a positive way. Sometimes you can use it in a negative way. But how do you isolate the data that you need? I mean, again, I hate to say that, we go back 30 years ago, we used to, you collect a lot of data early on in the project to help you decide what you want for a project. Now we have opportunities to use the actual data that's coming from building that we designed and operated and living in it, and our clients can react to these needs. For example, if you take, since I'm an electrical engineer, I'll talk a little bit about the power density. You always sizing equipment based on sometimes assumptions, but some of the assumptions has been validated over the years of actual data. By the time you design a building and build it, guess what? Technology is changing every day. Let's face it, it's every day. So you make assumptions, and then you start collecting more data that you find out that my assumptions, maybe I was very close, but maybe I was not, okay? So you adjust your needs on lighting. Take something simple. Does everybody like the same light levels? I can tell you the answer is no. And how much flexibility you want to have in that. And when you collect the feedback from your teams, you can actually see that if you ask 10 people, you might get, I'm not going to say 10 different answers, but at least 3 or 4 different answers. I take it in our own office, in our own environment. I have one person who wants their lights on bright, 100%. I have someone who doesn't want their light on in their open office. And we have someone who wants 50%. So you have to be able to understand that human nature and how to use that data to help you serve them.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested in, fascinating that you'd be now able to capture data from your own projects.
Yes.
But also then to obviously make things more flexible. Kurt, we were talking about this last night, about is it possible really to create flexible spaces? But I'm interested in obviously data must be a huge part of your business, and really how that's become something that's informed your practice positively.
Sure, absolutely. In working with our clients over the years, what we've realized or helped them through is that there's just so many solutions out there, and within the maturations of technologies and the trajectory of technologies, the ability to capture data through sensors and the cost effectiveness and the approachability of cost with sensors, wireless technologies has allowed us to capture data on so many different things. And so when we think about big data, I'm not sure what big data really means other than there's a lot of data available and out there. What's more important about data is how do you make it actionable? What can you glean from the data through whatever process it used, whether that's analytics or whatnot, to use those analytics to create better human outcomes. And so there's a phrase that I think is becoming more popular, and if you haven't heard it, you're probably going to start to hear it, and that's anticipatory humanistic buildings is kind of the new buzzword in terms of how do we capture data and create and facilitate environments that better allow our users to experience the built environment that is more humanistic. And so the anticipatory building has the ability through these sensors, through wireless technologies and others, to observe, to listen, to feel, to think, and to respond. And when we capture data around where people are and what the external influences are that are happening on the building, what their collaboration needs are, who they might be meeting with during the day, and what the building system's availability is, and for example, power quality. What we're able to do is create through surfacing the data, so analyzing that data, collecting it through an intelligent building platform, and surface that data back out in more meaningful ways to the user, to the human interface level, to create better passive navigation, to create better real estate outcomes, to facilitate temperature and lighting changes based on mood, occupancy, use, time of day, time of season, and things like that. And even sound. And so one of the things that's really driving the ability to take data is ubiquitous connectivity. So wireless, Wi-Fi, DAS, other communication wireless strategies, analyze that data and then surface it back to the user in really meaningful ways. So big data and all this data is really great, but if we can't use it, we can't make it help ourselves and our clients navigate through a space or a built environment, it doesn't do too much good.
Yeah, it's interesting. We the age-old question in my world is, what's the proof? How do I know that this is really going to work? How do I know that this is really going to improve my productivity of my staff or build a stronger culture? And I think, I've had a couple of instances where, to use Joe's language, to use sort of predictive analytics with a particular project where we were taking 5 disparate groups and putting them together in a new 2-story environment. These groups had never met before. It was a data analytics team, an EICU, process improvement team, a product development team, and the notion was we're going to throw them all together in this innovation center and kind of see what happens. And some people were really excited about this, and the majority were completely terrified. And we've got a great analytics team at Gensler that has primarily focused on kind of larger, more macro level, kind of citywide data collection and analysis. And we had them sort of look at this at a little bit more micro level of okay, we've got 2 floors and we've got 300 people, and how are they going to work together differently, and how is this connection of bringing them together going to have an impact on the organization? And we ran all these numbers and based on increased productivity and adoption of new behaviors and such and so forth, all these things that were kind of over my head at the time, sort of proved out that there was going to be a return on investment here, and that they would get to greater interaction, which was really what they were after. And so the space is now 2 years into its existence, and the energy around the space is just incredibly dynamic, and people are working together in different ways. And so I think as a predictive technology, it's super powerful. On the flip side of that, I had the pleasure or honor really of working on the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab with Kurt. And that was another sort of example of a hypothesis, this theory of translational medicine being embodied in the physical built environment. And intuitively, we knew that this was going to be a big deal, putting researchers, scientists, doctors, therapists, and patients all mashed up together in one space. And I do this all the time in workplace. We tell our clients that bring people together, collaboration is good. We need to give people the opportunity to have chance encounters with people that they don't necessarily interact with on a daily basis, and that leads to different innovative solutions. Of course, with the balance of being able to have that heads down sort of focus space that you need. I'm going to show you a picture. Let's see if this works. There we go. So this space is the Ability Lab at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, one of the centers of innovation, where in this space, researchers who typically or previously had been kind of sitting in their own graduate studio type facility, very separate from patients, separate from the clinicians and those servicing those patients, treating them. And this building just is having its 1-year anniversary, and already we're hearing anecdotal stories about how researchers are seeing patients actually struggle through activities, and it's triggering new ideas for those researchers, leading to new grants and ultimately improved outcomes, better outcomes for those patients. And the capture of that data, I think, is incredibly powerful, because here we have this hypothesis that as creative, design thinking people, we knew that this was a good idea. Now we're going to see scientific measurement and data collection about the true outcomes of that. And that sort of output of data in that kind of combination of use of space but interaction of people, I think is really going to transform the health industry and others beyond.
The Shirley Ryan Ability Lab is a really fantastic project. Congratulations. It's interesting, this concept of collaboration and bringing people together, especially when you work in a museum such as the Art Institute. We're probably one of the most siloed in terms of staff. We firmly sit in our fiefdoms and in our departments, which are scattered across the museum. But this is really changing. and this kind of much more hierarchical, I would say anarchic in many ways kind of structure is not feasible anymore in terms of, we do need to, be much more cross-departmental and work together. So I think that architecture and design is really at the heart of this, and obviously I could learn a lot from you guys in this respect. In terms of data, what's interesting hearing you all is, of course, it's depending on the lens that you shine through the data, will really determine your outcomes and your findings. And then, of course, it's data doesn't stand alone. It's really how you actuate that data, which leads me to our next question, which is another sort of huge topic, but one that I know that you're all thinking about, which is the Internet of Things. So this network space of digital devices that are absolutely being integrated now into all of our spaces. Joe touched on a couple of ways. And the global Internet of Things for the intelligent buildings market is forecast to soar from more than 6 billion last year to more than 22 billion in 2026. So it's hard to even contemplate those numbers. But what this means is that with billions of consumer and industrial devices now embedded with electronics and sensors and actuators and connectivity, which enables these objects the objects to exchange and share data, how can we expect building design to change and evolve and really be impacted as this trend becomes ever more the norm? And Joe, as this question really builds on the last one, I wondered if you could also pick up this conversation again and see. It'd be really interesting to know how consciously, a firm like Perkins+Will is really thinking about this in the type of work that you're doing.
In the area of workplace design, where most people are working, and knowledge workers and working in an office environment, it doesn't matter the industry, but their motivations change even though their tasks are the same. Almost everyone's job is to sit at a keyboard and to look at a screen, whether they're an engineer, whether they are a healthcare analyst, whether they are a CEO. They're often spending time, their alone time is very similar. It's the connections of the people that make that unique. So that the concept of collaboration and the culture of the workplace is really what we're designing for. We're designing for culture. So how can the Internet of Things help us design and help that culture along? Well, first we have to, I guess, define what culture is, or workplace culture. Culture is behavior over time. What you keep doing over time is what shapes culture. So and we're shaped by our space. Our culture, our behaviors, sometimes we're prisoners of our existing walls and conditions. But one measure that's really important is utilization, to understand what spaces are getting used by whom and why. So this is where Internet of Things can be very helpful. Having this data is really helpful. And it can be anecdotal, it can be measured. But if people are not using spaces, let's not give up on the space. Why are they not using it? Is it the light? Is it the sound? Is it the access? Is it the location? Is it the size? Like, what is it about that? And let's make it right. And if it's right, then people will use it. So if we have the utilization information, then we have a good indicator on whether it's helping people serve their own mission. So that's a big part of workplace. And then one of the themes then that helps with the Internet of Things and all of the ubiquitous technology is that it gives people mobility. So if you have a choice to move anywhere, to work anywhere, why would you come to the office? Why would you be in that one space? If you can work anywhere, why would you be there? And I think we all have to believe, and maybe you do too, we have to believe that we're in the space business. We're space believers. And being a believer in space means that there's a reason to come to the office. So that fear of missing out if I'm not there is not something I'm going to get in my dining room table. That fear of missing out, not being a contributor or not being part of that culture is really important. So spaces, I'll someone to Ann, I'll maybe show an image if I can. Let's pick one. Okay, this is an impromptu lecture from an author that dropped by at IDEO. This is culture. This is curiosity. This was not predicted. This was not planned. It's a very unprecious space, but this is the reason to go to the office. This is to learn, right? This is a studio-like culture. So when we're designing, we're trying to use all this data, which it can easily be a technology distraction, but the intent is very much about human connection. So we think about variety, choice, permission, and tools as the key features of mobility in a workplace that actually helps culture. And this, it looks like it's a rooftop terrace, but actually that's a conference room. It's how different is a picnic table from a conference room? It's got better lighting, actually. This is a test track for a bicycle component manufacturer. That's part of culture. Their culture is to test things in their office. They're engineers. It looks like it's fun. It is fun. That's part of their culture. So this cultural connection is so important. That's what makes place. And that's what builds culture. Culture is really what makes organizations move. So however we use that data, I always want to take it back to how is it affecting and predicting behavior, and we shape the space for that behavior.
I'm really interested in this idea of how you make place, and also this idea of human connections. And of course, Anne, you thought a lot about this with the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, which is really all about human connections at most, for some people, most intense time of their lives. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how this kind of connectivity through the digital realm really informs some of the outcomes in that project.
Yeah, I think this notion of being connected to purpose and connected to the culture and sort of understanding and feeling the mission of the organization is so critical. And that, I truly do believe also that space, has the opportunity to do that for people, bring people together, help them understand the sort of greater purpose. And when we were working on the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab in our early design stages, we thought, oh, this is going to be, super technologically, advanced, and it's going to be ADA on steroids, and it's going to be like the greatest hospital, restful place because people are going to be here for, the average stay is 30 days. And the CEO was very clear, and she said, this is not a place where people are going to come to relax. This is not a spa. This is not a place where you're going to kind of be served. You're coming here to work your tush off, and the space needs to feel that way, and it also needs to feel as though the greatest scientific technologies are being advanced in this location. And so they measure everything. They have these contraptions that they make that really, are in constant, feedback loops beyond my comprehension. They buy the most advanced tools and completely hack them apart and create their own machines that will, allow people to walk who haven't walked ever in their life. And it's just mind-blowing. But, in terms of how that sort of embedded technology is apparent and felt more than seen was really a big driver in that particular project. Our charge was to design a space that inspires hope. And that was a pretty lofty aspiration. And through the use of form and architecture and color and built-in, visible digital technologies, that really was what, drove that kind of connection to the mission and purpose. One other thing I'll mention is that, I think we've been starting to toy around with tools that measure emotion because we can, with the IoT, we can measure inputs in terms of use and function and how people are adapting spaces. But we've created an app that we're prototyping that actually allows you to input emotions related to spaces. And the notion is that, can we start to identify what spaces have positive outcomes related to, was it a productive meeting? Was it an inspiring conversation? Do you come back there on a regular basis for a certain reason? So that sort of, layer of, again, this kind of personal, emotional, experiential connection is something that I think technology is sort of on the next wave.
Mm-hmm. Saad, maybe I can come to you next. You can talk, because your perspective is so different in terms of where you're coming from and how you're related to this.
It's interesting to hear all this because I'm smiling because I've worked with architects for 38 years. I never thought I want to be an architect, so I end up my whole career working with architects. But that's what the nice thing about the whole thing. From the engineer's perspective, I look at technology as what can I do to make sure that information can be collected, all these things that Joe and and described can be done. I remember a long time ago, we used to talk about building systems. You always talked about architecture, structural, MEP, civil maybe. That's it. And after you design a building, you remember about, well, okay, what we're going to do with our phones, what we're going to do with our computers, what we're going to do with our AV. Oh, okay, well, let's do something. You can't do that anymore. Technology is another discipline. You always talk about architecture, MEP, structural. Technology has to be day one. And you have to design your buildings for not what you know today, it's for what you don't know. And that's a big challenge. Because you never design a building for 10 years and then you're going to get rid of it. You're designing buildings for 30, 50 years, okay? And you don't want to go and say, well, okay, yeah, fine, we'll gut the building every time we need to make a change. No, clients are not willing to do that, and they shouldn't. So our challenge is to make sure our infrastructure is flexible enough, cost-effective enough, reliable, maintainable, to be able to meet the challenges that we may know today that we see is coming in the next few years, but also things that we can't even think about. I mean, 5 years ago, I'm sure we never thought we see what we're seeing today. So that's, to me, is the biggest challenge.
It's interesting in my world because at the museum, we're constantly faced with what are artists going to come up with next? And of course, when you work in architecture and design, it means you collect across all kinds of media. So we're doing multimedia to real physical drawings and models and all types of work they're collecting. So the kind of specializations are increasing in terms of the work. But Joe, we talked a little bit about this last night in terms of maintaining flexibility and trying to kind of, we don't have a crystal ball, so how do we project what might be, but also then giving, still retaining character and personality to building projects and architecture. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about this. Sorry, Kurt, sorry, I'm looking at you and thinking of Joe, but yes, no, we talked about this last night.
Yeah, a little bit. So a little springboard of when we think about the Internet of Things, we also think about the Internet of Beings, and in the engineering side, what our real goal and role is to connect building systems, building technologies, enterprise technologies, people, space, in a way that facilitates the best outcomes or meets the goals of what the space is, and then to do that in a way that is future-oriented and not just fit for the purpose today, but really what the future purpose is. One of the challenges that we face is when we think about buildings and the systems that go into buildings, there's about 16 core technical systems, from building automation, HVAC, lighting control, power monitoring, life safety, security, and one of the challenges in how we see buildings changing in terms of embracing the Internet of Things, the Internet of Beings, and this convergence of technologies is for all of those systems to start to share. They all have very smart head ends. They all respond very well in silos. They're very focused on themselves. I'm talking systems as people now, but as themselves. But the real opportunity is to create the platform to integrate those systems, to share data in a real-time, bi-directional way, and with some analytical engine, so that you can capture data that might be happening in one place or from one type of system, and use that to inform other systems to respond, adapt more seamlessly and transparently and ubiquitously throughout the day, the hour, and the lifespan of the building. So a real challenge in the industry in terms of engineering right now is breaking down the silos, breaking down the proprietariness, and breaking down data transmission, ownership of data, and things like that. So what we're looking at in terms of supporting architecture is how do we, with the convergence of these systems and understanding that there's a real need for symbiosis to occur between architecture and structure and MEP engineering and technology, which is really, I believe, the future, is how can space adapt very, very rapidly, not just from month over month or year over year, but literally hour over hour. And what we find with our clients is there's just so much stranded capacity in real estate. Depending on different studies that you look at, over 50% of commercial real estate is stranded. In other words, that it's not being used or not being used to its potential or even for the purpose. And so what we are working with Ann and Joe and others in the design community is how do we create through technology and the sensors and understanding where people are at and what their needs are at any given time to adapt to space very quickly on the hour-over-hour basis, not just over time in terms of churn and office. And it's that through that symbiosis and that convergence of all the different systems that we'll be able to achieve that or continually be able to advance and better capture and use real estate more effectively. It is core to real estate strategy right now, capturing stranded capacity.
I like to think that technology is going to empower our clients to look more towards the future. And what I mean by that is, we often are asked as architects and designers and engineers to come in and deliver a solution. And I think what you're talking about, Kurt, is exactly kind of the future lens that our clients need to better understand, is that we're not going to give you a solution when we hand over the keys. That, this is, the solution is that it will change. And so I think, with that mindset and understanding that technology can help inform our clients of how space should adapt and can adapt to the changing needs of an organization, that I think that builds, it really opens the door for an opportunity of this sort of evolutionary design process within the built environment. And maybe that leads to buildings that live longer, buildings that, we're not tearing down, and a much more kind of evolutionary model, which is, I think, is really exciting.
Mm-hmm. I think this gets to my last question, because I know we've only got a few more minutes. We're running short on time, but I wanted to sort of tie some of these ideas together. I'm really interested in this idea of being able to be more, potentially more proactive than just reactive. And as I said before, of course, we all want to look into the future and see what the possibilities are, but none of us have a crystal ball yet. But from your experiences and picking up on some of the things you've said based on your own perspectives, how are you seeing the Internet of Things, some of the things we've talked about, big data, some of these more catchwords really playing out and their increasing importance to building design? And how close do you think we are to accomplishing some of the things? Maybe you could touch on some of the things you want to accomplish. How close are we? Or are there things that are so far out, but you're still, wanting to sort of go towards them at least, to sort of meet them halfway? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts in this regard, given your, retrospective backgrounds. Saad, do you want to? Oh, sorry, I was going to ask Anne, because Anne hadn't gone first yet.
Okay.
Sorry, Anne. And also, your perspective is quite unique in terms of working in industries where they're always challenged with thinking about situations that are absolutely unique, newness, things they've never potentially seen before, and being very fearless in terms of healthcare, for example. So I'm wondering how, from your perspective, you've thought about this in your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think this idea of sort of proof of concept or measurement is exciting for me. I think, my ultimate goal is to design spaces that are powerful experiences and that, facilitate emotional connections and, a sense of belonging and purpose. And I think, it's of course hard to predict. I mean, the App Store launched 10 years ago and has transformed our lives and arguably transformed cities. And so, it's a little bit difficult to sort of predict in the crystal ball, but I think what's important is to sort of keep those sort of basic fundamentals in place, is that we're designing spaces for people to live and work and play and most importantly grow. And so I think, technology is a piece of that to help, build that solution or that evolving solution. But I'm excited. I'm very excited about the fact that now we're starting to get in that sort of proof of concept phase, where we can really say, like, yes, this can work, this does work, and it can do so much more. And so I see all of this measurement and data collection, when analyzed in the right way, through the right lens, with the sort of notion of what's possible now that we know this, is a very exciting time.
Joe?
It is an exciting time. I'm happiest when a client wants to grasp and engage in big questions that are much longer term. When we are designing a space, it's too often it is hyper congruent to the known program for the next 3 years. We're going to have 42 people in the county. We need X number of file cabinets. We need X number of spaces in the parking lot. Those are not big questions. Those are very short term, very tactical, and still very expensive responses to implement. We're on the other side. We are creating a whole studio right now on what we refer to as resilience design, designing for unknown, unplanned events. It could be erratic weather, high tides, civil unrest, a crashed economy, unreliable power. These are events that will affect businesses and employees and communities, and those are the questions we're trying to get out in front of. Even when you think, well, we're just a small ad agency in downtown Chicago, do we need to realize these? Yeah, well, what if there's protests going on around your building? What if you don't have power? Are you out of business if you don't have power? You probably are out of business if you don't have power. So how do we use this data and actually, frankly, just understand what is going on in the world so that we can build more resilient cities, communities, employees, organizations? And that's an important part, I think, of resilience design. And we can bounce back and not be as affected. It can't be as devastating, whether it's a financial crash. In fact, I'll even show, but the concept of resilience design is often meaning looking inward to existing building stock. I mean, as architects, we like to build buildings, but in fact, the cities are where the action is, right? So leveraging existing infrastructure. The top of the building, that's a 1933 building that was the original Bank of Canada, their Federal Reserve System. The towers on either side are 12-story towers. They were built in 1977, designed by Sir Arthur Erickson. This building just went through a new seismic upgrade. Every outlet, every power, every pipe, everything was redone. The only thing that was kept was the structure and part of the skin, and this building was repurposed for the next 100 years with new security, new water systems, new green systems, energy recovery systems. So this is resilience design, and with existing stock. That's the best example in a dense urban area right across from Parliament. So it had to deal with new security matters. So this is great resilience design in action, and I think we need more of it. We need more forward-thinking clients to be able to implement that.
And Kurt, how would you respond?
Sure. So I completely agree, both with Ann and Joe, and as engineers and technologists, we support that. My goal and what our team is really working on, and I've said it several times here, is leveraging and converging technologies across a building in thinking about symbiosis and thinking about a building as an organism, as very much like a human being, and through that, capturing data and surfacing that data in a way that the user can access it and be aware of it. And so it's that humanistic element of all this data happening, but what does it really mean to me? And when I understand as an occupant of a space or a passer through of a space what might be happening in the space and what my influence might be in the space, the opportunity for behavioral change and the influence of behavioral change is just so incredibly powerful. We work with so many of our clients and just build awareness campaigns around capturing data and telling whether it's building to building on a campus or business unit to business unit, what their impact might be on the building. Just really simple things in terms of light energy and waste stream and HVAC. And the power of being aware and being in control and that behavioral change that drives is incredible in terms of what that does to the building. We also, one of my goals is to capture and continue to leverage location-based services. If we're really going to create more humanistic buildings and more future-oriented buildings, we have to understand or get over or create technologies that provide the opportunity to understand exactly where people are, in fact, in some cases, who they are, so that we can better respond symbiotically again to the environment and where and how people might be and the influences that we have. That requires tremendous cultural change and maybe some maturation in certain technologies around sensing and the wireless capability to pick these things up. But if we can better understand where people are at any given time and what their uses might be and what their profiles are, we can facilitate much better outcomes and capture stranded capacity and be more humanistically and anticipatory back to that of how the environment responds.
I'll look at this from a little bit on different viewpoint. Just leave you with the thought of how we deliver our product. We are architects and engineers. We deliver drawings. Okay, I mean, right now we receive submittals electronically, but we still deliver either hard copies or PDF, Bluebeam, whatever you want to call it. I think we need to think of the day when we deliver actually a model. The actual model goes to as a submittal, as an actual submittal, not only to our clients, but to building officials, even contractors, where the day is going to come, if we like it or not, where they're going to build from that model. There won't be any paper. I mean, we talked about paperless offices for a long time. We still haven't achieved that, at least not in my office. Okay, we tried. But I think we need to think about that. That day is going to come. If I look in my crystal ball, and I've been wrong many times, but I see that's coming. It's going to be coming sooner than later.
Yeah, I would just add to that. It's the digital twin, and what we're seeing is in terms of the future of the buildings, there's the physical and the digital twin that exist, and the more those are converged, the greater the opportunity is to be future-oriented.
So you heard it here first, digital twins. This was fascinating stuff. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'd like to personally thank all of our expert panelists for their insights, and I'd like to invite Jeff Miller onto the stage to give closing remarks. Here's Jeff.
I'd like to thank you all very, very much for starting your day with us and being part of the discussion on future purpose design. I would also ask you to join me in thanking Joe, Ann, Kurt, Saad, and Zoe for helping to lead this discussion during the course of the day today. So thank you very, very much. As Joe said it, we are space believers at Ideal Industries, and we view it as part of our mission to continue to develop and deliver new innovations that enhance spaces and empower users. And we'd love to continue this conversation with all of you and invite you to join us during the course of LightFair at our booth, which is booth number 1067 in the main expo hall. And we look forward to seeing how you, in the future, employ future purpose design. Thank you very much and have a great day.